She stood trembling in the dusty Colorado street, her fingers white-knuckled around a crumpled letter, the only proof that someone wanted her here. Eleanor Price had traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, but that wasn't the dangerous part. The dangerous part was the secret hidden beneath her high-necked dress, bruises like dark flowers blooming across her ribs, her arms, her back. Evidence of a nightmare she'd barely escaped. When the tall cowboy stepped forward, hat in hand, she flinched before she could stop herself. And in that moment, Caleb Hart saw everything. Want to know if love can grow from fear? If trust can bloom where violence once lived? Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Eleanor's journey reaches. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in a cloud of copper dust that turned the afternoon sun hazy and golden. Eleanor Price pressed her palm against the worn leather seat to steady herself, her other hand clutching the letter she'd read so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth. Through the window, she could see the town of Redemption Springs spreading out like a promise she wasn't sure she deserved. Wooden storefronts, a church steeple, horses tied to hitching posts, and people moving with the purposeful stride of those who belonged somewhere. She belonged nowhere. Not anymore. The driver's voice called out, rough and cheerful. "Redemption Springs, watch your step, ma'am." Eleanor took a breath that hurt. Everything hurt these days. The compression of her corset against her ribs sent sharp reminders of Henry's fists, Henry's boots, Henry's rage that had finally crescendoed into something she couldn't survive if she stayed. Her uncle, by marriage. Her guardian after her father's death. The man who'd smiled at the funeral and showed his true face 3 days later. She'd fled Boston with $42, her mother's ring sold for passage, and a newspaper advertisement she'd answered in desperation. Rancher seeking practical wife. Companionship and partnership. No romance required. Write to Caleb Hart, Redemption Springs, Colorado Territory. No romance required. Those 3 words had been a lifeline. Eleanor gathered her skirts, brown wool, sensible, hiding everything that needed hiding, and accepted the driver's hand to step down. Her boots hit the dirt, and she swayed slightly. 2 weeks of travel, of sleeping on hard benches and eating dry bread, of flinching every time a man's voice rose in anger at a card game or a delayed departure. "Your trunk's coming, ma'am," the driver said, tipping his hat. "Welcome to Redemption Springs." She nodded, unable to speak. Welcome. As if she had any right to expect welcome anywhere. The town smelled of horses and wood smoke and something green she couldn't name, pine maybe, or the wild grasses she'd seen stretching for miles before they'd reached the mountains. So different from Boston's coal smoke and sea salt. So different from the house where Henry had locked her in her room for 2 days after she'd tried to visit a friend without permission. "Miss Price?" The voice came from behind her, low and steady. Eleanor turned, her hand instinctively rising to her throat where her collar buttoned high despite the warmth. She'd sewn the dress herself, making sure every inch of skin from collarbone to wrist was covered. The man standing 3 feet away was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark vest over a work shirt and denim trousers that had seen honest labor. His hat was in his hands. He'd removed it the moment he'd spoken to her, and his hair was dark brown, touched with sun at the edges. His face was tanned, carved with lines that suggested he spent his days squinting into distance, and his eyes were a startling light brown, almost amber in the afternoon sun. Those eyes were careful, cautious, kind. Eleanor flinched anyway. She saw him notice, saw something shift in his expression, not offense, but something sadder, understanding maybe. "I'm Caleb Hart," he said, and he didn't step closer. "I'm glad you made it safely." Her voice came out smaller than she'd hoped. "Mr. Hart." "Caleb, please." He gestured vaguely at the town around them, still keeping his distance. "I know this isn't what you're used to. It's rough country out here." "It's fine." The lie tasted familiar. How many times had she told people everything was fine while Henry's handprint bloomed purple on her arm? "Thank you for the arrangement." "No, thanks needed." Caleb turned slightly, pointing down the main street. "I've got a room arranged for you at Mrs. Cooper's boarding house. Figured you'd want some time to settle before anything else. Wedding isn't until you're ready." Eleanor's chest loosened slightly. She'd been terrified he'd expect immediate vows, immediate rights, immediate everything. That's very considerate. Considerate is just decent. He finally took a step forward, slow and telegraphed like he was approaching a skittish horse, and gestured toward her trunk, which the driver was lowering from the coach roof. "May I?" She nodded, watched as he lifted her trunk, which contained everything she owned in the world, with an ease that spoke of daily hard work. He settled it on his shoulder, still not crowding her space. "Mrs. Cooper's is just down here," he said. "We can walk, if you're not too tired." "I can walk." She'd walked out of Henry's house in the middle of the night with blood on her lip and a cracked rib. She could walk 3 buildings down a dusty street. They moved in silence, Eleanor acutely aware of every person who turned to look. A woman in a blue dress paused her sweeping to stare. 2 men outside what looked like a saloon tracked their progress with open curiosity. A boy of maybe 10 grinned and waved at Caleb, who nodded back but didn't slow. "They're just curious," Caleb said quietly. "Town this size, everybody knows everybody's business, or thinks they do." "Do they know about me?" Eleanor asked, then wished she hadn't. What did it matter what strangers knew? "They know I sent for a bride from back east. They know you're arriving today." He slowed his pace slightly. "They don't know anything else, and they won't unless you want them to." Something in her throat went tight. Privacy, discretion, respect. Things Henry had stripped away when he'd started shouting about her ingratitude where the servants could hear. Mrs. Cooper's boarding house was a neat 2-story building with white curtains in the windows and a porch that wrapped around the front. Before they reached the steps, the door opened and a woman emerged, 50-some years old, gray hair pinned up, wearing a practical calico dress and an expression of warm curiosity. "You must be Miss Price." She bustled down the steps with the confidence of someone who ran her domain with capable hands. "Welcome, dear. I'm Martha Cooper. I've got your room all ready. 2nd floor, faces east, so you'll get the morning light. Nothing fancy, but clean." "Thank you, Mrs. Cooper." Eleanor managed a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "Oh, none of that Mrs. business, unless you want to make me feel ancient. Martha's just fine." She turned to Caleb. "You can take that trunk right on up, Caleb. Room 3. "Yes, ma'am." Caleb headed inside, and Eleanor found herself alone with Martha Cooper's shrewd, kind eyes. "You look done in, honey," Martha said gently. "Why don't you come sit on the porch for a minute? I've got fresh lemonade, and you can catch your breath before dealing with stairs." Eleanor wanted to refuse, wanted to go straight to her room, lock the door, and stop being visible. But Martha was already guiding her to a rocking chair, and the lemonade appeared as if by magic, cool and tart and exactly what her dust-dry throat needed. "Caleb's a good man," Martha said, settling into the chair beside her. "Quiet, works hard, treats people fair. He hasn't had an easy time of it, but I suppose none of us out here have." Eleanor sipped her lemonade and said nothing. What could she say? That she was marrying a stranger because she had nowhere else to go? That she'd chosen this sight unseen because the advertisement had promised no romance required, and that had sounded like salvation? "He won't rush you," Martha continued, her eyes on the street rather than on Eleanor, which somehow made it easier. "Whatever arrangement you two work out, that's your business. But I run a respectable house, and you're welcome here as long as you need." "I appreciate that." Eleanor's voice wavered. I don't have much money left." "Caleb's already settled the account." Martha's tone brooked no argument. "You just focus on getting your bearings." Caleb emerged from the house, no longer carrying the trunk. He descended the porch steps and stood in the street, hat still in his hands. "I'll let you rest, Miss Price. I'm heading back to the ranch. It's about 5 miles out. I'll be back in town Saturday morning. That's 3 days. If you need anything before then, Martha knows how to reach me." Saturday. 3 days to prepare herself for marriage to this careful stranger. "Saturday," Eleanor repeated. "Only if that suits you." Caleb's eyes were steady on hers. "If you need more time, you just say so. No pressure, no judgment." Henry would have told her what she needed, would have decided for her, would have made it clear that any delay was ingratitude, any hesitation was insult. Saturday is fine, she heard herself say. Caleb nodded, put his hat back on. Then I'll see you Saturday, Miss Price. Martha. He tipped his hat to both of them and walked toward a horse tied near the general store, a sturdy bay that nickered at his approach. Eleanor watched him mount with the unconscious grace of someone who'd been riding since childhood, watched him turn the horse and head out of town without looking back. No demands, no expectations laid out, just space given freely. Come on, honey, Martha said, rising from her chair. Let's get you settled upstairs. The room was small, clean, and perfect. A single bed with a quilt that looked handmade, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, a small dresser, and a window that looked out over the town to the mountains beyond. Eleanor stood in the center of it and felt something dangerous rising in her chest. Hope, maybe, or the terror that came before hope. Supper's at 6, Martha said from the doorway. Just family style in the dining room, nothing fancy. You come down when you're ready, or I can bring something up if you'd rather. I'll come down. She'd hidden enough. Hidden in her room while Henry raged. Hidden bruises under long sleeves in August. Hidden herself so completely she'd almost forgotten who she was beneath the fear. Martha smiled. Good. You get yourself freshened up. There's fresh water in the pitcher and towels in the drawer. When the door closed, Eleanor locked it, an old habit, and then immediately felt foolish. But she didn't unlock it. Instead, she moved to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. The mountains were purple in the distance, topped with white that might be snow. The sky was bigger than any sky she'd ever seen, stretching wide and blue and endless. The air smelled different here. Tasted different. Everything was different. She unbuttoned her collar with shaking fingers, unwound the scarf she'd wrapped around her throat. Slowly, carefully, she peeled back the fabric of her dress to look at what she'd been hiding. The bruises were fading, green and yellow now instead of purple-black. The worst were on her ribs where Henry had kicked her when she'd fallen. There was a handprint on her upper arm, another on her wrist, a shadow along her collarbone where he'd grabbed her throat. Evidence. Proof. Shame. Eleanor pulled her dress closed and buttoned it back up with methodical precision. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to cry. No more. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford, and self-pity would help nothing. When the 5 minutes were up, she washed her face in the basin, pinned her hair more securely, and went downstairs to face whatever came next. Supper at Martha's table was a revelation. There were 4 other boarders, an older gentleman who worked at the bank, a young couple newly arrived to start a shop, and a widow woman who taught at the school. The conversation flowed around Eleanor like water around a stone, easy and comfortable. No one pried, no one asked invasive questions. They simply included her in the circle and let her participate or not as she chose. The food was simple but abundant. Roast chicken, potatoes, greens from Martha's garden, fresh bread that steamed when you broke it open. Eleanor ate more than she had in weeks, her body finally believing it might be safe to be hungry. After supper, she helped clear the table despite Martha's protests. It felt good to be useful, to move with purpose, to contribute however small the contribution. Caleb mentioned you might want to visit the church before Saturday, Martha said as they washed dishes side by side. Reverend Mitchell does the marrying, but he'll want to speak with you both first, just to make sure you're entering into this with clear minds. Of course. Eleanor scrubbed a plate with more force than necessary. What would she tell a reverend? That she was marrying for escape? That she'd fled one form of imprisonment and hoped this wouldn't be another? He's a kind man, Martha continued. Not the fire and brimstone type. Lost his wife to fever 5 years back, so he understands that life isn't always what we planned. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. That night, in her small, clean room with the door locked, she pulled out the letters. All 6 of them, though only the first had been an advertisement. The others had come after she'd written to the post office box, after she'd taken the terrifying step of answering. The first letter from Caleb Hart had been brief and honest. He'd explained that he was 32 years old, owned a cattle ranch with his brother, and wanted a wife for practical reasons. He'd been clear. He needed help managing the household, and in return he offered security, respect, and independence within the bounds of marriage. He'd asked about her skills, her expectations, her reasons for answering the advertisement. She'd lied in her reply. Said she was seeking adventure, a new life in the West. Said nothing about Henry, about fear, about the bruises that were fresh then. His second letter had asked if she understood what ranch life entailed. Hard work, isolation, harsh weather. He'd wanted her to be realistic about what she was choosing. She'd written back that she wasn't afraid of hard work. That had been true, at least. The third letter had contained money for passage and a simple statement. If you arrive and find this isn't what you want, the money is yours regardless. No obligations. She'd cried over that letter, cried because a stranger was offering her a choice when the men who should have protected her had offered only violence. The remaining letters had been practical, details about the journey, the town, what to bring, and what he could provide. And in each one, a consistent thread. You will be safe here. That's a promise. Eleanor folded the letters carefully and tucked them back into her trunk. Tomorrow she would explore the town. Saturday she would marry. And after that she would discover if safety was enough, or if she'd simply traded one cage for another. The next 2 days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Eleanor walked the dusty streets of Redemption Springs, visited the general store where a cheerful man named Mr. Brennan talked her ear off about the quality of his goods, sat in the church for an hour just breathing in the silence. She met Reverend Mitchell, a gentle-eyed man who asked her simple questions and seemed satisfied with her careful answers. She bought fabric with some of her remaining money, nothing fancy, just good sturdy cotton, and began sewing a new dress for the wedding. White seemed presumptuous, but she found a soft gray blue that reminded her of dawn. Martha lent her the use of her sewing room, and they worked together in companionable silence, Martha mending and Eleanor stitching her future together one seam at a time. "You're running from something," Martha said on Friday evening, not looking up from the shirt she was patching. "I can see it clear as day." Eleanor's hand stilled on her needle. "I'm not asking what," Martha continued calmly, "and I'm not judging. Half the people in this territory are running from something. Bad debts, bad marriages, bad luck. Out here, what matters is what you do now, not what happened before." "What if what happened before follows you, Eleanor whispered. "Then you deal with it when it comes." Martha bit off her thread with decisive teeth. "But you don't have to deal with it alone. That's the thing about small towns. Everybody knows your business, but everybody also has your back when trouble comes calling." Eleanor wanted to believe that, wanted to believe that she could be safe here, that Henry wouldn't find her, that this strange new life could become real. Saturday morning arrived clear and cool. Eleanor woke before dawn, dressed in her new gray-blue dress, and pinned her hair with more care than she'd taken in months. The bruises were nearly invisible now, just shadows if you knew to look for them. She checked her collar 3 times, making sure nothing showed. Martha brought her breakfast in her room, toast and eggs and tea, and sat with her while she ate. "Nervous?" Martha asked. "Terrified," Eleanor admitted. "That's natural. Marriage is a big step, even when you know the person." Martha patted her hand. "But Caleb's steady. He won't steer you wrong." At 10 o'clock, Eleanor walked to the church. Martha came with her, and so did Mrs. Brennan from the general store and the widow teacher whose name was Sarah. 3 women who barely knew her, standing as witnesses to this strange practical union. Caleb was already there, standing with a man who looked enough like him to be his brother. Same height, same build, though the other man's hair was lighter and his expression more openly curious. Both wore clean shirts and vests, their best clothes clearly. "Miss Price," Caleb said, and his voice was steady. "This is my brother, James." "Ma'am," James tipped his hat. "Welcome to the family." Family. The word made Eleanor's throat tight. Reverend Mitchell gathered them all in the small church that smelled of beeswax and pine. The ceremony was brief, practical, almost businesslike. Eleanor spoke her vows in a voice that only shook slightly. Caleb spoke his with quiet conviction. There were no rings. They hadn't discussed rings. But when the Reverend said Caleb could kiss his bride, Caleb paused. "May I?" he asked quietly, for her ears only. Eleanor nodded, bracing herself. But the kiss was chaste, gentle, barely a brush of lips against lips. Respect, not possession. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Hart," Reverend Mitchell said, smiling. Mrs. Hart, Eleanor Hart. A new name for a new life. The witnesses congratulated them. James clapped his brother on the shoulder and winked at Eleanor, which should have been presumptuous, but somehow wasn't. Martha hugged her tight and whispered, "You'll be just fine, honey." And then it was done. Eleanor was married. Caleb had brought the wagon to town, a sturdy farm wagon with a bench seat and supplies loaded in the back. He helped Eleanor up with careful hands, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. "The ranch is about an hour out," he said as they rolled out of Redemption Springs. "We've got a house, nothing fancy but solid. James lives there too, but he's got his own room and mostly keeps his own hours." Eleanor nodded, watching the town recede behind them. "I want you to know," Caleb continued, his eyes on the road ahead, "that the bedroom situation is entirely up to you. There's a spare room that can be yours, or we can share the main bedroom, or any arrangement in between. I meant what I said in my letters. You're safe, and that means you get to choose." Her hands twisted in her lap. "You don't want—" "What I want doesn't matter if it's not what you want too." His voice was firm. "Marriage should be a partnership, Miss Eleanor, not ownership." The tears came before she could stop them. Silent tears that slid down her cheeks while she stared at the mountains ahead. Caleb saw. Of course he saw. But he didn't comment, didn't demand explanation. He just drove the wagon and gave her space to cry, and somehow that kindness made her cry harder. The ranch appeared gradually, first fence lines, then grazing cattle in the distance, then finally a house and barn nestled in a valley with a stream running silver through the grass. The house was wood and stone, single story but sprawling, with a porch that wrapped around two sides. Smoke curled from the chimney, chickens pecked in a yard. It looked like something from a painting of Western life. "Home," Caleb said simply. He helped her down from the wagon, and she stood in the yard feeling unmoored. This was where she lived now. This was her home. The word still felt foreign. "Let me show you around," Caleb offered. "Unless you'd rather rest?" "No, I'd like to see." Movement was better than stillness. Stillness let the thoughts catch up. The house tour was brief. A main room with a fireplace and comfortable furniture. A kitchen that was clearly used for real cooking, not just show. 2 bedrooms, one larger with a double bed, one smaller with a single. A washroom with an actual indoor hand pump, which Caleb explained with some pride that he'd installed himself. "James is out checking the north fence," Caleb said, standing awkwardly in the main room. "He'll be back for supper. I usually cook, but if you'd rather—" "I can cook," Eleanor said quickly. "I'd like to help." "All right then." He smiled, and it transformed his face from serious to handsome. "I'll show you the pantry, and you can decide what sounds good." They made supper together in a silence that was only occasionally awkward. Eleanor found her way around the kitchen, and Caleb took direction well, chopping vegetables while she prepared a roast. It felt almost normal, almost safe. James arrived as the sun was setting, cheerful and loud in a way that filled the house with energy. He complimented Eleanor's cooking enthusiastically, told stories about the ranch that made even Caleb smile, and treated her like she'd been part of the family for years rather than hours. After supper, after the dishes were washed and put away, after James had excused himself to his room with a knowing wink that made Eleanor's stomach clench, Caleb stood in the main room and cleared his throat. "I'll take the spare room," he said. "You should have the main bedroom. It's bigger, and—" "No." Eleanor surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. "That's your room. I'll take the spare." "Eleanor, please." She met his eyes, needing him to understand. I need my own space, just for now. Is that all right?" "Of course it's all right." His expression was gentle. "Whatever you need." He helped her move her trunk into the spare room, which was small but had a window overlooking the stream and a bed that looked comfortable. He brought her fresh linens, showed her where extra blankets were kept, and then paused in the doorway. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "I know we're strangers. I know this arrangement is unusual, but I want you to know you're not alone here. You're not a prisoner. You're my wife, and that means partner, equal. You have a say in everything." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Good night, then." He started to close the door, then paused. The door doesn't lock from the outside, only from the inside. If you want privacy, you have it. When he closed the door, Eleanor sank onto the bed and pressed her hands over her mouth to muffle the sob that wanted to escape. A lock that only worked from the inside. A man who asked permission before kissing his own wife. A promise of partnership instead of ownership. It was too much. Too good. Too terrifying to believe. She changed into her nightgown with shaking hands, checking the window, checking the door, checking for threats that her body insisted must be there, even though her mind knew better. Then she climbed into bed in her locked room in a house in the middle of Colorado and listened to the sounds of safety. Wind in the grass, the distant call of an owl, the settling of wood as the house cooled. No shouting, no footsteps in the hall that meant violence coming, no locked doors keeping her in. Eleanor pulled the quilt up to her chin and allowed herself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, she had found something real, something that could last, something like home. And in the main bedroom down the hall, Caleb Hart lay awake and wondered about the woman he'd married, wondered about the fear in her eyes, the flinch when he'd first approached her, the way she checked exits and stood with her back to walls, wondered what had put those shadows in her face, and whether she'd ever trust him enough to let them fade. He'd meant every word he'd said. She was safe here, he'd make sure of it, even if he didn't yet know what she needed safety from. The first week of marriage passed in a careful dance of politeness and distance. Eleanor woke each morning to the sound of Caleb and James moving around the house, their boots on the wooden floors, their low voices discussing the day's work. She dressed quickly in her locked room, checking her reflection to make sure every bruise remained hidden, then emerged to find coffee already made and the men preparing to head out. "Morning," Caleb would say, his tone neutral, respectful, never presuming. "Good morning," she'd reply, and they'd share the same stilted conversation about weather and meals and nothing that mattered. James was easier somehow. He filled silences with stories about the cattle, about town gossip, about anything and everything. He didn't seem to notice or mind that Eleanor barely spoke, or maybe he noticed and was kind enough to pretend he didn't. On the fourth day, James came in from morning chores and found Eleanor attempting to reach a pot on a high shelf. She was stretching on her toes, her arm extended, when he bounded over with his usual enthusiasm. "Let me get that for you, Eleanor." He reached past her, his arm coming close, and Eleanor's body reacted before her mind could intervene. She flinched violently, stumbling backward, her hand flying up to protect her face. The kitchen went silent. James froze, pot in hand, his cheerful expression dissolving into shock and something that looked like understanding. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to startle you." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. "It's fine. I'm fine. It's not fine." Caleb's voice came from the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in. His eyes moved from her defensive posture to his brother's stricken face. "James, give us a minute." "Sure. Yeah." James set the pot on the table and left quickly, the door closing softly behind him. Eleanor couldn't look at Caleb, couldn't bear to see judgment or pity or questions in his face. She stared at the pot instead, her breathing too fast, too shallow. "Eleanor," Caleb's voice was gentle. He didn't move closer. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to tell me. But I need you to know neither James nor I will ever hurt you. Not on purpose, not by accident, not ever." "I know that." Her voice came out strangled. "I know you won't. It's just, my body doesn't always remember what my mind knows." She heard him exhale slowly. "How long has it been since you left whatever you were running from?" 3 weeks. The admission slipped out before she could stop it. 3 weeks since I left Boston. And before that?" Eleanor's hands twisted in her apron. "My father died 6 months ago. Heart failure. He was all I had, and when he died, I went to live with my uncle by marriage, Henry." The name tasted like poison. He seemed kind at first, but after the funeral, after the will was read, and he realized my father left me nothing but debts, he changed. She could feel Caleb listening, his presence steady in the doorway. He said I owed him for taking me in, said I was ungrateful, lazy, worthless. The words came faster now, like a dam breaking. At first it was just words. Then it was a slap when I disagreed with him. Then worse. Much worse. Eleanor, Caleb's voice was rough. You don't have to. He broke 2 of my ribs. She cut him off, needing to say it, needing someone to know. The night I left. He was drunk and angry about something at his club, and he came home and decided it was my fault. He kicked me while I was on the floor, and I heard them crack, and I knew if I stayed he would kill me eventually. The silence stretched between them, heavy with horror and rage carefully contained. So I left, Eleanor continued, her voice barely a whisper now. I took what money I had, sold my mother's ring, and bought passage west. I saw your advertisement in a newspaper someone had left at the boarding house where I was hiding. No romance required. That's what made me write to you, because I knew I can't. You can't be what you're not ready to be, Caleb finished quietly. And you shouldn't have to be. Eleanor finally looked at him. He was standing very still, his hands clenched at his sides, his face a mask of controlled fury. But the fury wasn't directed at her. She understood that instinctively. Where is he now? Caleb asked. This Henry, does he know where you are? No, I don't think so. I told no one where I was going, changed coaches 3 times, used a different name on the passenger list until I got here. She'd been so careful, so terrified of being found. Caleb nodded slowly. All right. Then here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay here, and you're going to heal, and you're going to let yourself believe that you're safe. Because you are. I promise you that. You can't promise. Yes, I can. His voice was absolute. This is my land, my home. What I say here is law. And I say you're under my protection, mine and James's. Anyone who wants to hurt you will have to go through both of us. And I can promise you, Eleanor, that won't happen. Something in her chest cracked open. Why? She whispered. Why would you do that for a stranger? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain. Because 5 years ago, I couldn't protect someone who needed protecting. And I've regretted it every day since. Before Eleanor could ask what he meant, James knocked on the doorframe. Sorry to interrupt, but we've got a problem with the fence line. Need you, Caleb. I'll be right there. Caleb looked at Eleanor one more time. We'll talk more later, but for now, just know, you're safe here. That's not going to change. He left with James, and Eleanor stood in the kitchen surrounded by the ordinary domestic chaos of breakfast dishes and that pot still sitting on the table. She picked it up with shaking hands and filled it with water for coffee, going through the motions while her mind spun. He'd lost someone he couldn't protect. The words echoed in her head. Who? How? She wanted to know. Needed to know, maybe. If she was going to trust this man with her safety, she needed to understand what had shaped him. That evening, after supper, after James had excused himself to go into town for a card game, Eleanor and Caleb sat in the main room with the fire crackling low. The silence between them had shifted, still careful, but less fragile somehow. You said you lost someone, Eleanor began, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Someone you couldn't protect. Caleb stared into the fire for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he started speaking, his voice low and measured. Her name was Anna. We grew up together. Families had neighboring ranches. Everyone always assumed we'd marry, and I suppose we assumed it too. We got engaged when I was 24, started planning a wedding for the following spring. Eleanor waited, not interrupting. Anna's father was a hard man, mean when he drank, which was often, but Anna was strong, said she could handle him, that it was just until we were married and she could leave. I believed her. His jaw tightened. I shouldn't have. What happened? 6 months before our wedding, her father came home drunk and angry. Anna tried to calm him down, and Caleb stopped, swallowed hard. He pushed her. She fell, hit her head on the stone hearth. By the time the doctor got there, it was too late. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, Caleb. I should have taken her away from there sooner. Should have married her immediately instead of waiting for the right time and the proper wedding. Should have protected her. His voice was rough with old guilt. But I didn't. I left her in that house with that man, and she died because I wasn't brave enough to act. It wasn't your fault, Eleanor said softly. Wasn't it? He finally looked at her, his eyes haunted. I knew he was dangerous. I knew she wasn't safe, but I did nothing because it wasn't my place to interfere between a man and his daughter. Society said I should wait, be patient, let her family handle their own affairs. And she died because I listened to society instead of my gut. Eleanor understood then. Understood why he'd sent for a bride he didn't know. Why he'd been so careful about consent and choice. Why he'd made space for her fear instead of demanding she move past it. That's why you put no romance required in the advertisement, she said. You didn't want someone hoping for love. You wanted someone who needed safety. I wanted someone who could choose freely, Caleb corrected. Romance, love, passion, those things can cloud judgment. Make people stay when they should run. Make them hope when they should protect themselves. I didn't want that. I wanted clean terms, clear expectations, a partnership based on honesty, not emotion. And now? Eleanor asked. Now that you know what I was running from? Now I'm even more certain I made the right choice. He met her eyes steadily. You survived, Eleanor. You got yourself out. That takes more strength than most people have. And now you're here, and you're safe. And you get to decide what happens next. Not Henry, not me. You. The words settled over her like a blanket. Choice, agency, freedom. Thank you, she whispered. They sat in companionable silence after that, watching the fire burn down to embers. When Eleanor finally rose to go to her room, Caleb stood as well. Eleanor, he said, if you ever want to talk more about what happened, I'll listen. And if you never want to talk about it again, that's fine too. But either way, you're not carrying it alone anymore, all right? She nodded, not trusting her voice, and retreated to her small room with its lock that only worked from the inside. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Eleanor was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, a task she'd claimed for herself, needing to contribute somehow, when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. She tensed automatically, her body preparing for flight, but relaxed when she recognized the rider. Martha Cooper sat astride a sturdy mare, wearing a split riding skirt and a broad-brimmed hat. She waved cheerfully as she dismounted. Thought I'd come check on you, Martha called. Make sure married life is treating you well. Eleanor managed a smile. It's been an adjustment. I imagine so. Martha tied her horse to the fence post and joined Eleanor at the laundry line, picking up a shirt to hang. Big change from Boston to ranch life. They worked together in silence for a moment before Martha spoke again, her tone casual. You settling in all right? Caleb and James treating you well? Very well, Eleanor said honestly. They've been nothing but kind. Good. Those Hart boys are decent men. Martha pinned a pair of trousers to the line with practiced efficiency. Their father died when they were young, cattle stampede. Their mother raised them on her own until she passed a few years back. Taught them to respect women, work hard, and keep their word. Eleanor absorbed this information, adding it to her growing understanding of the man she'd married. I also wanted to invite you to the ladies' church social next week, Martha continued. It's just the women from town getting together to sew and gossip. Nothing fancy, but it's a good way to meet folks, make friends. The thought of meeting more people, of being social and normal, made Eleanor's stomach clench, but she heard herself saying, That sounds nice. Good. I'll come fetch you Wednesday afternoon. Martha gave her a knowing look. And Eleanor, if you need to talk about anything at all, I'm a good listener. No judgment. Eleanor's hand stilled on the sheet she was hanging. How did you... Honey, I've been running a boarding house for 20 years. I've seen women arrive with all kinds of secrets hiding in their eyes. Martha's voice was gentle. Whatever brought you here, it's your business. But if you ever need a woman to talk to, my door's always open. Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. She blinked them back and nodded. Martha stayed for another hour, helping with laundry and then joining Eleanor for coffee in the kitchen. She filled the space with easy chatter about town news, who was courting whom, whose cow had gotten loose, the latest shipment at the general store. Normal, everyday things that made Eleanor feel almost ordinary. After Martha left, Eleanor found herself thinking about the church social, about the possibility of friendship, of community, of belonging somewhere. It was terrifying and appealing in equal measure. That evening, she mentioned it to Caleb at supper. "Martha invited me to the ladies' social next week," she said, pushing beans around her plate. "I told her I'd go." "That's good," Caleb said. "Martha's been a pillar of this community for years. The women she gathers are good people." "I'm nervous," Eleanor admitted. "I haven't been social in a long time." James looked up from his second helping of roast. "They'll love you. You're new and interesting. Plus, you can cook better than half the women in town, which will make you very popular." Eleanor felt herself smile. "I doubt that." "No, he's right," Caleb said. "This meal is better than anything we've had in years. You've got a real talent." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. She'd spent so long being told she was worthless, useless, that any acknowledgement of skill felt like water in a desert. The days developed a rhythm. Caleb and James worked the ranch. Eleanor managed the house. She cooked and cleaned and mended, finding satisfaction in the tangible results of her labor. No one criticized her work or found fault with her efforts. No one shouted or struck or locked her away. It was so different from her life with Henry that sometimes she had to remind herself it was real. On Wednesday, Martha arrived in her buggy to collect Eleanor for the social. Eleanor had dressed carefully in a simple green dress with long sleeves despite the warm afternoon. She'd practiced not flinching when people moved suddenly, practiced smiling like everything was fine. The social was held in the church hall, a plain room with windows open to catch the breeze. 8 women were already there when Eleanor and Martha arrived, ranging in age from 20 to 60, all with curious but friendly faces. "Ladies," Martha announced, "this is Eleanor Hart, Caleb's new bride. Let's make her feel welcome." What followed was a blur of names and faces. Sarah, the widow teacher Eleanor had met at the wedding. Mrs. Brennan from the general store. A young woman named Katie, who was pregnant with her first child. An older woman named Edith, who ran the town's only restaurant. Others whose names Eleanor struggled to remember. They settled into chairs arranged in a circle, sewing projects in laps, and the conversation flowed like a river finding its course. "How are you finding ranch life, Eleanor?" Sarah asked, her needle flashing as she hemmed a skirt. "It's different from Boston," Eleanor said carefully, "but beautiful. The mountains are breathtaking." "Wait until winter," Edith said with a laugh. "Then you'll see if you're still charmed by those mountains." "Don't scare her, Edith," Martha chided. "Eleanor's hardy. I can tell." Katie leaned forward, her hand on her swollen belly. "Is it true you came all the way from Boston by yourself? How brave." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I wouldn't call it brave, more like necessary." Something in her tone must have conveyed more than she intended, because the room went quiet for a moment. Then Sarah spoke gently. "We all come to this territory for different reasons. What matters is that we're here now, building something together." The other women murmured agreement, and the conversation shifted to safer topics. The upcoming harvest festival, the new bolt of fabric at Brennan's store, the unseasonably warm weather. Eleanor relaxed incrementally, her shoulders lowering from where they'd been hunched near her ears. These women weren't prying or judgmental, they were just kind. It was Katie who noticed first. Eleanor had reached for her coffee cup, and her sleeve had ridden up slightly, exposing the fading yellow-green bruise on her wrist. Katie's eyes widened, and she glanced quickly at Eleanor's face, then away. Eleanor tugged her sleeve down, heart pounding, but the damage was done. Martha cleared her throat. "Eleanor, would you help me fetch more thread from my bag? I left it in the buggy." It was clearly a pretext, but Eleanor stood gratefully and followed Martha outside. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, and she took a shaky breath of fresh air. "That bruise on your wrist," Martha said quietly. "There are more, aren't there?" Eleanor couldn't lie. Not to this woman who'd shown her nothing but kindness. "They're old, fading, from before I came here." "I figured." Martha's expression was sad but not pitying. "Honey, you don't have to tell me anything, but I want you to know you're not alone in this. Half the women in that room have their own stories of running from something. We don't judge. We just support each other." "Really?" Eleanor's voice was small. "Really?" Martha squeezed her hand. "Sarah's husband died in a mining accident back east, and his family tried to take her daughter away from her. That's why she came here. Katie's family disowned her when she married a man they didn't approve of. Edith left an arranged marriage in St. Louis. We've all got scars, Eleanor. Some just show more than others. Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. I was afraid everyone would think less of me if they knew. The only person anyone thinks less of is the coward who hurt you, Martha said firmly. Now come on, let's get back before they eat all of Edith's lemon cake. When they returned, the atmosphere in the room had shifted subtly. The women looked at Eleanor with warm understanding rather than curiosity. No one asked questions, but when Eleanor sat down, Sarah handed her a cup of fresh coffee, and Katie offered her a piece of cake with a smile that said, "We understand." For the first time since leaving Boston, Eleanor felt like maybe she could belong somewhere, like maybe she could be more than just a woman running from her past. The social lasted another 2 hours. When Martha finally drove Eleanor back to the ranch, the sun was setting in spectacular shades of orange and purple. Eleanor felt wrung out, but lighter somehow, less alone. Caleb was waiting on the porch when they arrived. He helped Eleanor down from the buggy and thanked Martha for bringing her home. "How was it?" he asked as they watched Martha's buggy disappear down the road. "It was good," Eleanor said, and meant it. Really good. Something in Caleb's expression softened. "I'm glad. You deserve to have friends, to have a life beyond just this ranch." That night, as Eleanor prepared for bed in her small room, she realized her hands weren't shaking when she checked the lock. The nightmares that had plagued her since leaving Boston were coming less frequently. Her body was slowly learning that not all raised voices meant danger, that not all male footsteps in the hall meant violence. She was healing. Slowly, carefully, but healing nonetheless. And in the main bedroom down the hall, Caleb lay awake thinking about the woman who was legally his wife, but still felt like a stranger. A stranger he was beginning to know. A stranger he wanted to protect. A stranger who was becoming something more, though he couldn't quite name what. He'd promised her safety, choice, respect. He'd meant it. But somewhere in the past 2 weeks, his feelings had begun to shift from obligation to something deeper, something that felt dangerously like caring. He pushed the thought away. Eleanor needed space to heal, not pressure from a husband with complicated feelings. She needed time. And time was the one thing Caleb could give her without reservation. 2 weeks later, the routine of ranch life was interrupted by necessity. A bad storm had damaged part of the north fence, and several cattle had wandered onto neighboring property. It would take both Caleb and James multiple days to round them up and make repairs. "We'll need to camp out there," James explained at breakfast. "Too far to ride back and forth each day." Caleb looked uncomfortable. "I don't like leaving you alone, Eleanor." "I'll be fine," Eleanor said more confidently than she felt. "It's just a few days." "Martha could come stay with you," Caleb suggested. "I don't need a babysitter." The words came out sharper than intended. Eleanor softened her tone. "I appreciate the concern, but I can manage a few days alone. I grew up in a city, remember. I'm not completely helpless." James grinned. "She's got you there, brother." Caleb still looked uncertain, but finally nodded. "All right. But if anything at all makes you uncomfortable, you ride into town and stay with Martha. Promise me." "I promise." They left that afternoon, packs loaded on their horses, rifles in their saddle holsters. Eleanor watched from the porch as they rode north, becoming smaller and smaller until they disappeared over a rise. Then she was alone. The silence of the empty house was both peaceful and unnerving. Eleanor moved through her daily tasks, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, making herself a simple supper. As darkness fell, she locked every door and window, checked them twice, then retreated to her room with a lamp and a book. She was fine, perfectly fine. The house was secure. There was nothing to fear. But when something thudded against the side of the house around midnight, Eleanor's heart nearly stopped. Eleanor sat frozen in her bed, the book slipping from her nerveless fingers. The thud came again, followed by a scraping sound that made her blood turn to ice. Someone was outside. Someone was trying to get in. Henry. The name exploded in her mind with the force of certainty. He'd found her. Somehow, impossibly, he'd tracked her across 2,000 miles, and now he was outside in the dark, and Caleb wasn't here, and she was alone, and another thud, then silence. Eleanor's breath came in sharp, painful gasps. She couldn't move, couldn't think, could only sit paralyzed while her mind showed her images of Henry breaking down the door, finding her, dragging her back to Boston where no one would save her. Then she heard it. A low, plaintive sound that definitely wasn't human. Eleanor forced herself to move, to cross to the window on shaking legs. She peered through the gap in the curtains, her eyes adjusting to the moonlit darkness. At first, she saw nothing. Then movement caught her eye, something large and dark near the side of the house. A cow. It was just a cow, one that must have wandered close to the house, bumping against the wall as it grazed. Eleanor's knees gave out and she sank to the floor, pressing her hands over her mouth to muffle the hysterical laugh that wanted to escape. A cow. She'd nearly died of terror over a cow. But even as relief flooded through her, shame followed close behind. This was what Henry had done to her. Turned her into someone who jumped at shadows, who saw threats in every sound, who couldn't spend a single night alone without falling apart. She hated it, hated the fear that lived in her bones, hated that months after escaping, she was still a prisoner to what he'd done to her. Eleanor pulled herself up and climbed back into bed, but sleep was impossible now. She lay awake until dawn painted the windows gray, her mind churning with memories she couldn't escape and fears she couldn't name. The next day dragged endlessly. Eleanor threw herself into work, scrubbing floors that were already clean, mending clothes that didn't need mending, baking bread they didn't need. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling. By the time the sun set on the second day, exhaustion had dulled the sharp edge of her anxiety. Eleanor ate a cold supper, too tired to cook, and was preparing for bed when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. Her heart lurched. Caleb and James weren't supposed to return for at least 2 more days, which meant this was someone else. Someone unexpected. Eleanor moved quickly, extinguishing the lamps so the house looked dark and empty. She positioned herself near the window where she could see the front yard without being seen, her hand gripping the heavy iron poker from the fireplace. A single rider emerged from the darkness, pulling his horse to a stop in the yard. The moon was bright enough that Eleanor could make out details. A tall man, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat. He dismounted with fluid grace and stood for a moment looking at the dark house. Then he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the still night. "Eleanor! Eleanor, it's Caleb! Don't be frightened!" Caleb. Eleanor's grip on the poker loosened as relief flooded through her. She set it down carefully and went to the door, her hands fumbling with the lock she'd secured so thoroughly. When she finally got it open, Caleb was climbing the porch steps. He stopped when he saw her face. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. You startled me. I wasn't expecting you back yet." Eleanor was acutely aware of how she must look. Hair disheveled, still dressed, dark circles under her eyes from 2 nights of poor sleep. "I know. I'm sorry." Caleb stayed on the porch, not pushing past her into the house. "I couldn't stop thinking about you here alone. James said I was being an idiot, that you were perfectly capable of managing, but I needed to make sure you were all right." Something warm unfurled in Eleanor's chest. "You rode back just to check on me?" "It's only a few hours. I can head back at first light." He shifted his weight, looking almost embarrassed. "I won't intrude. I just needed to see with my own eyes that you were safe." Eleanor stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in. You must be exhausted." Caleb hesitated, then entered. Eleanor relit a lamp, and in its warm glow she could see the dust on his clothes, the lines of fatigue around his eyes. He'd ridden hard to get here. "Have you eaten?" she asked. "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." Eleanor moved toward the kitchen. "Sit down. I'll make coffee, and there's bread from this morning." "Eleanor, you don't have to." "I want to." She said it firmly, needing him to understand. "Please, let me do this." Caleb sat at the kitchen table while Eleanor bustled about, slicing bread and cheese, heating coffee. Her hands were steadier now, the fear of the past 2 nights receding in the face of his solid presence. "I've been acting like a fool," she said as she set food in front of him. "Last night I nearly had heart failure because a cow bumped into the house. I thought—" She trailed off, not wanting to voice the terror that had gripped her. "You thought it was him," Caleb said quietly. "The man you ran from." Eleanor nodded, sinking into the chair across from him. "I know it's irrational. I know he can't possibly know where I am, but my body doesn't seem to understand that. Every sound, every shadow, I'm right back in that house in Boston, waiting for him to come through the door." Caleb set down the bread he'd been about to bite. His eyes were intense on hers. "Eleanor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Her stomach clenched. "All right. Who hurt you?" The question was gentle but inexorable. "I know it was your uncle. I know his name is Henry. But I need to know exactly what he did. Not because I have any right to know, but because I can't protect you if I don't understand what I'm protecting you from." Eleanor's first instinct was to deflect, to minimize, to protect Henry's reputation the way she'd been taught good women should. But she looked at Caleb's face, at the genuine concern there, the absence of judgment, and something in her broke open. "He started with words," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "telling me I was ungrateful, worthless, a burden, that I should be thankful he took me in when my father left me with nothing but debts. After a while, I started to believe him, started to think maybe I did deserve it when he got angry." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, just listened. "The first time he hit me was 3 weeks after I moved in. I'd served dinner late because I'd been trying to finish mending his shirts. He backhanded me across the face and told me a woman's first duty was to feed her household on time." Eleanor's hand rose unconsciously to her cheek, remembering. "I was so shocked. My father never laid a hand on me. Never. I thought it was an aberration, that Henry was just stressed, and if I tried harder, did better, it wouldn't happen again." "But it did," Caleb said softly. "It did. Again and again. Each time over something smaller, food that wasn't to his liking, a wrinkle in his shirt, a letter I'd received from an old friend that he thought was inappropriate. He'd hit me, then apologize, tell me he loved me like a daughter, and it hurt him to discipline me, but I needed to learn, and I believed him." Shame colored Eleanor's voice. "I actually believed it was my fault." "It wasn't." Caleb's voice was hard as iron. "It was never your fault." Eleanor looked up at him, tears blurring her vision. "I know that now, but then I was trapped. He'd taken control of my father's debts, told me I couldn't leave until they were paid off. He controlled every penny. I had no money, nowhere to go, no friends he hadn't driven away. I was completely dependent on him." "How did you finally get out?" "The night he broke my ribs." Eleanor's voice steadied as she spoke of the escape. "He came home drunk from his club. Someone there had embarrassed him, and he decided to take it out on me. He grabbed me by the throat, threw me against the wall. When I fell, he kicked me. I heard my ribs crack." Caleb's hands clenched into fists on the table. "I lay there on the floor, and I realized he's going to kill me. Maybe not tonight, but soon. If I stay, I die." Eleanor wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "So when he passed out in his chair, I packed a bag with what I could carry. I took $42 from his desk, money he owed me for household expenses he'd never paid, and I left." "How badly were you hurt?" "2 cracked ribs, bruises everywhere, a split lip, finger marks on my throat." Eleanor's hand went to her collar automatically. "I hid in a boarding house for a week, barely left the room. That's where I saw your advertisement. No romance required." Those words felt like a lifeline. Caleb pushed back from the table and stood, pacing to the window and back. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with suppressed rage. "Eleanor, I need you to understand something. What that man did to you, it's not discipline, it's not love. It's not anything a decent human being does to another. It's violence, pure and simple, and if he ever comes near you again, I will put him in the ground." The words should have frightened her. Instead, they made her feel safer than she'd felt in months. "I'm sorry," Caleb continued, running a hand through his hair. "I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't let my anger—" "Don't apologize." Eleanor stood as well, facing him across the kitchen. "You asked who hurt me, and I told you. Now I'm asking you to make me a promise. Anything. Promise me you'll never raise a hand to me in anger, ever. I don't care how angry I make you, how much I disappoint you, how badly I fail at being a wife. Promise me you'll never hit me." Caleb crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and took her hands in his. The first time he'd initiated touch since their wedding. His hands were warm, calloused from work, gentle despite their size. Eleanor Rose Hart, "I swear to you on my life, on my honor, on everything I hold sacred, I will never ever raise a hand to you in anger. I will never hurt you physically. I will never force you to do anything you don't want to do. And if I ever make you feel unsafe in any way, you have my permission to leave immediately with my full support and whatever resources you need." Tears were streaming down Eleanor's face now. "You mean that? I've never meant anything more." His thumbs brushed over her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "You're not property, Eleanor. You're not a servant or a burden or anything Henry told you. You're my wife, my partner, and you deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, always." Eleanor's voice shook when she spoke. "I don't know how to be married without fear. I don't know how to trust that you mean what you say." "Then we learn together." Caleb's eyes were earnest on hers. "I won't rush you. I won't push, but I will be here, consistent and steady, until your mind catches up with what your heart is starting to believe. That you're safe here. That I'm not him. That this is real." Something shifted in that moment, standing in the lamp-lit kitchen with their hands joined. Not love, not yet, but the foundation on which love could be built, trust beginning to take root in soil that had been scorched and salted. "I want to believe you," Eleanor whispered. "Then start there." Caleb squeezed her hands gently, then released them. "Start with wanting to believe, and we'll work on the rest." He stepped back, giving her space again. "I should let you sleep. I'll bed down in the barn." "No." The word came out more forcefully than Eleanor intended. "I mean, you don't have to. You can sleep in your own room. I trust you." Caleb studied her face. "Are you sure?" Eleanor nodded. She wasn't entirely sure if she was being honest, but she wanted to be. Wanted to start building that trust with something concrete. They prepared for bed with careful politeness, moving around each other in the small house. When Eleanor finally locked herself in her room, the familiar ritual felt different somehow, less like self-protection and more like habit. She could hear Caleb moving in the main bedroom, the creak of the bed as he lay down. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Eleanor fell asleep quickly. And for the first time in months, she didn't dream of Henry. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Caleb moving quietly in the kitchen. When she emerged, already dressed, she found him preparing to leave. "I need to get back to James," he said, looking almost reluctant. "But I'll be home in 3 days. 4 at most." "I'll be fine," Eleanor said, and this time she mostly believed it. "I know you will." Caleb picked up his hat, then paused. "Eleanor, thank you for trusting me with the truth. I know it wasn't easy." "Thank you for asking," she managed to smile. "And for writing back just to check on me. That meant more than you know." Something warm flickered in Caleb's eyes. Then he was gone, riding back toward the north pasture and his brother and the work that was never quite finished on a ranch. Eleanor spent the rest of the day in a strange, peaceful haze. The fear that had gripped her for 2 days had loosened its hold. She still checked the locks that night, still startled at unexpected sounds. But the terror was muted now, manageable. Caleb and James returned 4 days later, dusty and exhausted but successful. They'd recovered all the cattle and repaired the fence. James regaled Eleanor with stories over supper about Caleb's obsessive worrying, how he'd nearly ridden back to check on her 3 more times. "I told him you were probably having a lovely, peaceful time without us underfoot," James said, grinning, "but he insisted you might need something." Eleanor caught Caleb's eye across the table and smiled. "I managed just fine, but I'm glad you're both back." That night, as she prepared for bed, Eleanor realized she'd left the book she was reading in the main room. She hesitated, then opened her door. Caleb was still awake, sitting by the fire with papers spread on the table. Ranch accounts, probably. "I forgot my book," Eleanor said from the doorway. "The one on the side table?" Caleb retrieved it and brought it to her. As he handed it over, their fingers brushed. Eleanor didn't flinch. They both noticed. Caleb's eyes widened slightly, and Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. Good night, Caleb, she said softly. Good night, Eleanor. Progress, Eleanor thought as she closed her door. Small, incremental, but real. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm. Caleb and James worked the ranch while Eleanor managed the household with increasing confidence. She attended the weekly ladies' social, where the women had fully embraced her as one of their own. Sarah had become a particular friend, often stopping by the ranch for afternoon tea and conversation. Eleanor's body was healing. The bruises had faded completely, leaving no visible trace of Henry's violence. Her ribs no longer ached when she breathed deeply. Physically, she was whole again. Emotionally, was more complicated. There were good days when she could almost forget to be afraid, when Caleb's presence felt comfortable rather than threatening. And there were hard days when something, a raised voice, a quick movement, the sound of heavy footsteps, sent her spiraling back into fear. Caleb navigated both with patient steadiness. He never pushed, never complained about the separate bedrooms or the careful distance Eleanor maintained. He simply existed in her space with unfailing gentleness, letting her set the pace. It was James who finally said something. 2 months into the marriage, he found Eleanor in the garden one afternoon, weeding the vegetable patch she'd started. Can I ask you something? James settled onto the ground beside her, pulling weeds with his usual enthusiasm. And you can tell me it's none of my business. All right, Eleanor said warily. Are you happy here? James's eyes were serious for once. Really happy, not just safe? Eleanor sat back on her heels, considering. I don't know if I know what happy feels like anymore, but I'm content, peaceful. That's more than I had before. Caleb cares about you, you know. James pulled up a particularly stubborn weed. I've never seen him this careful with another person. It's like he's handling glass. I know he cares. Eleanor did know. She could see it in the way Caleb made her coffee exactly how she liked it, in the way he always asked before entering a room where she was, in the 1,000 small considerations that marked his days. I care about him too. I don't know how to show it. You show it every day, James said gently, in the meals you cook, in the way you mend his shirts, in the fact that you're here at all. Caleb sees it. We both do. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. I want to be a real wife to him, I do, but every time I think about... She couldn't finish the sentence. About intimacy? James supplied bluntly. Eleanor, there's no timeline on this. Caleb would wait forever if that's what you needed. But maybe you're waiting for some magical moment when you stop being afraid, and that moment isn't coming because healing doesn't work that way. Eleanor looked at him sharply. What do you mean? I mean, maybe you have to choose it even while you're still scared. Choose to trust, choose to be vulnerable, choose to take the risk. Not because the fear is gone, but because what you want is bigger than what you're afraid of. James stood, brushing dirt from his pants. Just something to think about. He left her in the garden, and Eleanor sat among the growing vegetables thinking about his words. Choose it, even while still scared. Choose trust over fear. Choose Caleb, not because he'd earned it or proved himself or waited long enough, but because she wanted to. Did she want to? Eleanor examined her heart honestly. Yes, she did. She wanted more than this careful distance. Wanted more than parallel lives lived politely in the same house. She wanted partnership, intimacy, connection. She wanted to be Caleb's wife in truth, not just in name, but wanting and doing were different things. The fear was still there, still real. How did you bridge that gap? The answer came a week later, in the most unexpected way. Eleanor woke to the sound of rain hammering the roof and thunder that shook the windows in their frames. She'd always loved storms, and she lay in bed listening to nature's fury with something close to contentment. Then she heard shouting. Eleanor threw on her robe and ran into the main room. James was there, already half-dressed, his face tight with worry. It's Caleb, he said. Part of the barn roof collapsed in the storm. He went to move the horses out and hasn't come back. Fear, sharp and immediate, cut through Eleanor. How long? 10 minutes, maybe more. James was pulling on his boots. I'm going after him. I'm coming with you. Eleanor's voice brooked no argument. Eleanor, it's dangerous. That's my husband out there. The words came out fierce, possessive. I'm coming. They ran through the storm, the rain soaking them instantly. The barn was partially collapsed, one corner caved in where the roof had given way. James plunged inside and Eleanor followed, her heart hammering. Caleb! James's shout echoed in the damaged space. A groan answered from the far corner. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. They found him pinned under a fallen beam, his face gray with pain, blood running from a cut on his forehead. The horses, Caleb gasped. Get the horses out first. To hell with the horses, James said, but he was already assessing the beam, looking for leverage. Eleanor moved without thinking. She positioned herself beside James, her hands gripping the rough wood. On 3, she said. Eleanor, you can't. On 3, she repeated. Together they heaved. The beam shifted, not much but enough. Caleb dragged himself free with a cry of pain, and they let the beam fall with a crash. Can you walk? Eleanor was already examining him, her hands moving with surprising steadiness. Blood from the head wound, a leg he was favoring badly, but he was conscious and breathing. I think so. Caleb tried to stand and nearly fell. Eleanor caught him, taking his weight without hesitation. Between them, Eleanor and James got Caleb back to the house. They settled him on the sofa, while Eleanor fetched water and bandages, her hands moving with purpose despite the fear churning in her gut. I'm fine, Caleb kept insisting as she cleaned the cut on his head. It looks worse than it is. You have a beam fall on you and you're fine? Eleanor's voice was sharp with fear-driven anger. Your leg might be broken, Caleb. It's not broken, just badly bruised. But he winced when she examined it, and Eleanor's heart clenched. James cleared his throat. I'll go check the horses, make sure they're secure in the paddock. You two, take your time. When he left, Eleanor continued her ministrations with shaking hands. She bandaged Caleb's head, checked his ribs for breaks, probed his injured leg as gently as she could. All the while, terror and relief warred in her chest. Eleanor. Caleb's hand caught hers, stilling her frantic movements. I'm all right, truly. You could have died. Her voice broke. That beam could have crushed you, and I would have lost you, and I never even told you. Told me what? His voice was gentle. Eleanor looked at him, at this man who'd given her safety and patience and respect. This man who'd ridden through the night just to make sure she was all right. This man who'd promised never to hurt her and had kept that promise every single day. That I want this to be real, she whispered. I want to be your wife. Not just in name, but in truth. I want to stop being afraid and start choosing you. Caleb's eyes searched her face. Eleanor, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. She squeezed his hand. That's why I want to, because you've never demanded it, never pressured me, never made me feel like I owed you anything. You've just been patient and kind and steady. And somewhere in all that patience, I fell for you, Caleb Hart. His breath caught. You did? Eleanor laughed shakily. Apparently so. Took a barn falling on you for me to realize it, but yes, I love you, and I'm tired of fear deciding what I do and don't do. I'm ready to choose something else. What are you choosing? Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. You, Eleanor said simply. I choose you. Caleb pulled her down onto the sofa beside him, his arms coming around her carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Eleanor didn't pull away. She leaned into his embrace, letting herself be held for the first time since that chaste kiss at their wedding. It felt like coming home. I love you too, Caleb murmured against her hair. I have for weeks now. I just didn't want to burden you with it. Eleanor pulled back enough to look at him. Kiss me, she said. Really kiss me. Not like at the wedding, like you mean it. Caleb's eyes darkened. Are you sure? I'm terrified, Eleanor admitted, but I'm sure. The kiss was gentle at first, cautious, but Eleanor pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt, and Caleb responded. The kiss deepened, grew heated, spoke of months of longing and restraint finally finding release. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Eleanor was trembling. But not with fear, with want, with need, with the exhilaration of choosing vulnerability over safety. Stay with me tonight, she whispered. In your room. Our room. Caleb cupped her face in his hands. Only if you're ready. Only if you want it. I want it, Eleanor said, and meant it with her whole heart. I want you. I want us. I want to stop running from what Henry did and start running toward what we could have. Then that's what we'll do, Caleb promised. Together. They stayed on the sofa for a long time, Eleanor curled against Caleb's side, his arms around her, both of them breathing through the enormity of what had just shifted between them. The storm raged outside, but inside the house felt warm and safe, like they'd created their own shelter from everything that had come before. James returned eventually, stomping mud off his boots on the porch before entering. He took one look at them, Eleanor nestled against Caleb, Caleb's hand stroking her hair, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Horses are fine," he announced. "I'll fix the barn roof in the morning. Think I'll turn in early tonight. You two, take your time." After he disappeared into his room, Eleanor felt nervous energy flutter in her stomach. She'd said she was ready. She'd meant it. But now that the moment was approaching, old fears clawed at the edges of her courage. Caleb must have sensed her tension because he shifted slightly, giving her space without pulling away entirely. "We don't have to do anything tonight," he said quietly. "Just because you said it doesn't mean we have to act on it immediately." "I want to." Eleanor's voice was small but determined. With Henry, it was never about wanting. It was about surviving. And before that, I was never courted properly, never had the chance to—" She trailed off, embarrassed. Understanding dawned in Caleb's eyes. "You've never been with a man willingly." Eleanor shook her head, shame heating her face. "Henry forced himself on me twice, said it was his right as my guardian to prepare me for marriage. I fought him the first time. The second time I just went somewhere else in my mind until it was over." Caleb's jaw clenched so hard Eleanor could hear his teeth grind. "That wasn't preparation for marriage. That was assault." "I know that now." Eleanor took a shaky breath. "But it means I don't know what it's supposed to be like when you actually want it." Caleb was quiet for a moment, his hand still moving gently through her hair. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "Then we'll figure it out together. And we'll go slow as you need. If you want to stop at any point, we stop. No questions, no disappointment, no pressure, all right? All right?" Eleanor lifted her head to look at him. "But Caleb, I don't want you to treat me like I'm made of glass forever. I want to get past this. I want what we have to be real, full, complete." "It's already real," Caleb assured her. "But I understand what you mean, and we'll get there, just not all at once." He stood carefully, favoring his injured leg, and extended his hand to her. Eleanor took it, her palm fitting against his like it belonged there. They walked together to the main bedroom, their bedroom now, she supposed, and Caleb lit the lamp on the bedside table with a low flame that cast everything in soft, golden light. Eleanor stood uncertainly in the middle of the room while Caleb closed the door, not locking it, just closing it for privacy. "Come here," he said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed and pulling her to stand between his knees. "We're just going to talk for a bit. Get comfortable with being in here together. Is that all right?" Eleanor nodded, some of her tension easing. Talking she could do. "Tell me something," Caleb said, his hands resting lightly on her waist. "Something good from before everything went wrong. A happy memory." Eleanor thought for a moment. "My mother used to make Sunday breakfast. Nothing fancy, just eggs and toast and jam, but she'd let me help even when I was tiny and made more mess than progress. My father would read the newspaper and pretend not to notice when I stole bacon from his plate." Caleb smiled. "That sounds lovely. Tell me more." So Eleanor talked, the words coming easier as Caleb listened with genuine interest. She talked about her childhood, about the brownstone in Boston where she'd grown up, about the neighbor's cat who used to visit their kitchen window. Small, happy memories she'd buried under months of trauma. Caleb shared his own stories in return, growing up on the ranch, learning to ride before he could properly walk, his mother's fierce protectiveness over him and James. The easy rhythm of the conversation slowly dissolved Eleanor's nervousness. When Caleb finally kissed her again, it felt natural rather than frightening. Eleanor leaned into it, her hands finding his shoulders, letting herself feel the warmth of his body, the gentle press of his lips against hers. "Can I take down your hair?" Caleb murmured against her mouth. Eleanor nodded, her breath catching as Caleb's fingers found the pins holding her hair up. He removed them slowly, one at a time, letting the dark waves fall around her shoulders. When he was done, he ran his fingers through it, his expression almost reverent. "You're beautiful," he said softly. "I'm ordinary," Eleanor countered, but her cheeks flushed with pleasure. "Not to me." Caleb's hands framed her face. "To me, you're the bravest person I've ever met. You survived hell and came out the other side still capable of trust, still capable of hope. That's extraordinary." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. "I don't feel brave." "Bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's doing the thing anyway." Caleb kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. "Like now, you're terrified, but you're here. That's courage." Eleanor kissed him then, pouring everything she felt into it, gratitude and desire, and the tentative beginning of trust. Caleb responded carefully, letting her control the pace, the depth, the intensity. When Eleanor's fingers went to the buttons of her dress, Caleb stilled her hands. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm sure." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "I want you to see me, all of me. The parts Henry damaged and the parts he didn't." Caleb helped her with the buttons, his fingers deft despite the slight shake in his own hands. The dress fell away, then the layers beneath until Eleanor stood in only her thin chemise. The lamplight showed everything, the fading scars on her ribs where Henry had kicked her, the shadow of an old bruise on her shoulder, the marks violence had left on her body. Eleanor watched Caleb's face, waiting for disgust or pity. What she saw instead made her breath catch, rage first, hot and fierce, quickly controlled, then tenderness so profound it made her want to cry. Caleb's fingers traced the scar on her ribs so gently it was barely a touch. "Every mark on your body is evidence of your survival," he said quietly. "They're not shameful. They're proof that you're a fighter, that you're here." "They're ugly," Eleanor whispered. "They're part of you." Caleb looked up at her, his eyes intense. "And I want all of you, Eleanor. The scared parts and the brave parts, the broken parts and the healing parts. All of it." Eleanor pulled him to his feet and began unbuttoning his shirt with shaking fingers. Caleb let her, standing still while she undressed him, revealing his own scars. A long one across his shoulder from a fence accident, smaller ones scattered across his hands and arms from years of ranch work. "We're both marked," Eleanor said, running her fingers over the scar on his shoulder. "We're both survivors," Caleb corrected. "Different battles, but survivors nonetheless." They came together slowly, carefully, with a tenderness Eleanor had never experienced. Caleb kept asking if she was all right, if she wanted to continue, if anything hurt or scared her. Eleanor answered honestly, stopping him once when panic flared, breathing through it while Caleb held her and told her they had all the time in the world. When they finally joined, Eleanor cried, not from pain but from the overwhelming relief of intimacy without violence, of touch given and received freely, of being wanted rather than used. "I've got you," Caleb murmured against her temple. "You're safe. I've got you." And Eleanor believed him. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the lamplight, Eleanor's head on Caleb's chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. The storm had passed while they were lost in each other, and now only the steady drip of water from the eaves broke the silence. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered. "For what?" "For being patient, for waiting, for making it beautiful instead of frightening." Caleb pressed a kiss to her hair. "Thank you for trusting me, for choosing this, for choosing us." Eleanor felt something settle in her chest, like a piece of herself she'd thought lost forever had clicked back into place. She wasn't healed. Healing would take time, probably years. But she was whole enough now to imagine a future that didn't revolve around fear. "I love you," she said, testing out the words in this new context. "I really do love you, Caleb Hart." "I love you too, Eleanor Hart." Caleb's arms tightened around her. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving you didn't make a mistake in trusting me." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and when Eleanor woke in the early morning, she didn't feel the usual spike of panic at finding a man in her bed. Instead, she felt peaceful, safe, home. The following weeks transformed their marriage from arrangement to partnership to something deeper. Eleanor moved her belongings into the main bedroom, though she kept her small room as a private space for when she needed solitude. Caleb's injured leg healed quickly despite his initial stubbornness about resting it properly. The barn roof was repaired with help from several neighbors who showed up unasked, the way frontier communities did when one of their own needed help. Eleanor discovered that physical intimacy became easier each time they came together. The fear didn't disappear entirely, but it diminished, replaced gradually by pleasure and connection. Caleb remained endlessly patient, learning what she liked, what made her tense, what helped her relax. He turned intimacy into a conversation rather than a demand, and Eleanor found her voice in that conversation. At the next ladies' social, Martha noticed the change immediately. "Well now," she said with a knowing smile as she poured Eleanor tea. "You look different, happy different." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, but didn't deny it. "Things are good, really good." "I'm glad, honey." Martha squeezed her hand. "You deserve good." Sarah leaned over, grinning. "Does this mean the marriage is well and truly consummated?" "Sarah," Eleanor gasped, scandalized. "Oh, please, we're all women here, and we've all been wondering how long Caleb was going to tiptoe around you like you were made of spun sugar." Sarah's expression softened. "I'm happy for you both. Truly." The other women murmured agreement, and Eleanor felt embraced by their genuine warmth. These women had become her friends, her support system, her community. They knew enough about her past to understand her present, and they celebrated her happiness without demanding details she wasn't ready to share. Katie, now hugely pregnant, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Speaking of marriages, mine is about to get a lot more complicated. This baby's coming any day now, and I'm terrified." The conversation shifted to childbirth and babies, and Eleanor listened with half her attention while the other half of her mind wandered. Children. She and Caleb hadn't discussed children, but it was a natural consequence of what they were now sharing. Did she want children? Could she be a mother when her own childhood had ended in such violence? That night, lying in bed with Caleb's arm around her, Eleanor broached the subject. "Katie's baby is coming soon," she said quietly. Thomas is nervous as a cat." Caleb's hand stroked her arm lazily. "He'll be fine once the baby's here. It's the waiting that's hard." "Caleb, do you want children?" She felt him shift slightly, his attention sharpening. "Do you?" "I asked first." Caleb was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "Honestly, I didn't let myself think about it before. When I sent for a bride, it was for practical reasons. I figured children might come eventually, or they might not. It wasn't the point. And now? Now everything's different." Caleb turned on his side to face her, his hand cupping her cheek. "Now I can imagine it. A little girl with your eyes. A boy we could teach to ride. But only if it's what you want, Eleanor. Only if you're ready for that." Eleanor thought about it, really thought about it. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared I'll be a terrible mother. Scared I'll damage a child the way Henry damaged me." "You could never do that." Caleb's voice was fierce with certainty. "You know too well what that damage looks like. You'd move heaven and earth to protect a child from experiencing what you experienced." "You really believe that?" "I know it." Caleb kissed her softly. "But we don't have to decide tonight. We don't have to decide for months or years. We can just let it happen naturally, or we can prevent it, or we can do anything in between. This is another thing we choose together." Eleanor felt the familiar warmth of being truly partnered with someone. "I think I'd like to let it happen naturally. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, we have each other. Then that's what we'll do." 3 weeks later, Katie went into labor. The whole town seemed to hold its breath while Sarah and Martha and Dr. Morrison attended her through a long, difficult night. Eleanor stayed at the ranch, pacing the kitchen while Caleb worked on ranch accounts and tried to project calm. When word came the next morning that Katie had delivered a healthy baby girl, Eleanor felt something shift in her own heart. She wanted that. Wanted the fear and pain to result in new life and hope. Wanted to build something with Caleb that was entirely theirs. She didn't tell him yet, just held the knowledge close and let it warm her from the inside. The season turned toward autumn, the air growing crisp and the aspens painting the mountainsides gold. Eleanor's garden produced abundantly, and she spent days preserving vegetables and making jams for the winter ahead. The work was hard but satisfying, and she fell into bed each night pleasantly exhausted. It was James who noticed first. He came in for morning chores to find Eleanor retching into the basin in the kitchen, her face pale and clammy. "Eleanor, you all right?" He hovered uncertainly in the doorway. "Fine," Eleanor gasped. "Just something I ate, I think." James looked skeptical but didn't argue. When it happened again the next morning and the morning after that, Eleanor couldn't deny the obvious any longer. She was pregnant. The realization brought joy and terror in equal measure. Eleanor stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, her hand pressed flat against her still flat stomach, trying to imagine a child growing there. Caleb's child. Their child. She needed to tell him, but the words stuck in her throat every time she tried. What if he wasn't ready? What if the reality of impending fatherhood changed how he felt about her? What if she couldn't do this, couldn't be a mother, couldn't bring a child into the world without damaging it the way she'd been damaged? The fears circled in her head like vultures. It was Martha who finally forced the issue. She stopped by one afternoon with fresh bread and took one look at Eleanor's face before sitting her down at the kitchen table. "How far along are you?" Martha asked bluntly. Eleanor's eyes widened. "How did you—" "Honey, I've seen that particular shade of green on enough women to recognize it instantly. Plus you've been tired, emotional, and I noticed you couldn't stand the smell of coffee this morning when I stopped by. So how far along?" "Maybe 6 weeks?" Eleanor's voice was small. "I haven't told Caleb yet." "Why not?" "I'm scared." Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. "What if I can't do this? What if I'm not strong enough to bring a child into the world? What if Henry's violence damaged me in ways I can't see, ways that will hurt the baby?" Martha reached across the table and took Eleanor's hands in her strong, capable ones. "Listen to me. You're one of the strongest women I've ever met. You survived violence that would have broken most people. You built a new life from nothing. You learned to trust again, to love again. You can absolutely do this. But what if nothing?" Martha's voice was firm. "You'll have help. You'll have me and Sarah and all the women in this town. You'll have Caleb, who will move mountains to keep you and that baby safe. And most importantly, you'll have yourself, your strength, your courage, your fierce determination to be better than what was done to you." Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I want this baby. I do. I'm just so afraid." Fear and love often walk hand in hand, especially when it comes to children. Martha smiled gently. "But you tell that husband of yours tonight. He deserves to know, and you deserve to share this with him instead of carrying it alone." That evening, Eleanor made Caleb's favorite meal, beef stew with fresh bread, apple pie for dessert. James noticed her nervous energy and made himself scarce after supper, claiming he needed to check the fence line even though it was nearly dark. When they were alone, Eleanor and Caleb sat by the fire with coffee. Eleanor's stomach roiled at the smell, but she forced herself to take a sip, gathering her courage. "Caleb, I need to tell you something." He set down his cup immediately, his full attention on her. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Better than fine. Eleanor took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Caleb's face transformed, wonder and joy spreading across his features like sunrise. "Pregnant," he repeated. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without the doctor confirming it. All the signs are there." Eleanor searched his face anxiously. Are you happy?" Caleb crossed to her in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Eleanor, this is everything." Eleanor felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. "You're not worried about whether I can do this?" "Why would I be worried?" Caleb pulled back to look at her, confusion in his eyes. "Because I'm broken." The words tumbled out. "Because Henry damaged me. Because I don't know if I'm strong enough to carry a child and birth it and raise it without somehow passing on all that trauma." Eleanor rose heart. Caleb's voice was fierce. "You are not broken. You are healing, which is different. And our child, is going to be loved and protected and cherished by both of us. You are going to be an amazing mother because you know exactly what not to do. And more importantly, you know what it feels like to be afraid, and you'll make sure our child never feels that way. You really believe that? I know it. Caleb placed his hand gently on her stomach. This baby is going to be so loved, Eleanor. So completely, utterly loved, and you're going to be incredible. Eleanor let herself believe him, let herself imagine a future with a child who grew up knowing only safety and love, who never flinched from raised voices or cringed from sudden movements, a child who would be everything she hadn't been allowed to be. "We're having a baby," she whispered, wonder filling her voice. "We're having a baby," Caleb confirmed, and kissed her with all the joy and promise the words contained. The pregnancy progressed with remarkable normalcy, which Eleanor found both reassuring and terrifying. Each morning that she woke without cramping or bleeding felt like a small miracle. Dr. Morrison confirmed what Eleanor already knew, pronouncing her healthy and the baby strong, and suddenly the abstract concept became undeniably real. Caleb transformed into someone Eleanor barely recognized, hovering, protective, insisting she rest when she showed the slightest sign of fatigue. It was endearing and occasionally suffocating. "I'm pregnant, not dying," Eleanor said one afternoon when Caleb tried to prevent her from hanging laundry. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years while still managing their households." "I know that." Caleb looked sheepish. "I just want to make sure you're not overdoing it." "I promise I'll tell you if I need help." Eleanor softened her tone, understanding that his protectiveness came from love, not control. "But I need to feel useful, need to keep moving. Sitting idle makes me anxious." They found a balance eventually. Eleanor continued her normal routines with Caleb's support rather than his interference. The women of the town rallied around her with advice, hand-me-down baby clothes, and stories both helpful and horrifying about their own experiences with childbirth. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by mid-November. Eleanor's belly swelled noticeably as the temperature dropped, and she found herself grateful for the layers of clothing that hid her changing body. She wasn't ashamed exactly, but something about being visibly pregnant made her feel vulnerable in ways she couldn't quite articulate. James teased her mercilessly and gently, calling her sister now instead of Eleanor, making her laugh with his predictions about whether the baby would be a boy or girl. He was convinced it would be a boy who looked exactly like Caleb, while Martha insisted it would be a girl with Eleanor's dark hair. Christmas came and went in a blur of simple celebration, evergreen boughs decorating the main room, a goose James had shot for dinner, small gifts exchanged with genuine affection. Eleanor made Caleb a new shirt from fabric she'd carefully chosen in town, while Caleb presented her with a rocking chair he'd spent weeks building in secret, its wood sanded smooth and perfect for nursing a baby. Eleanor cried when she saw it, hormones and gratitude combining into an emotional storm that left Caleb looking alarmed and pleased in equal measure. "It's beautiful," she managed through her tears. "It's the most thoughtful thing anyone's ever given me." The new year arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow. Eleanor's pregnancy had reached the uncomfortable stage where bending over was difficult. Her back ached constantly, and sleep came in fitful increments between trips to the outhouse. She was enormous, ungainly, and occasionally so irritable that even patient Caleb knew to give her space. "I feel like a whale," Eleanor complained one morning, staring at her reflection in dismay. An angry, uncomfortable whale. "You're beautiful," Caleb said loyally. "You're required to say that." But Eleanor smiled despite herself. February brought a surprise visitor that shattered the peaceful rhythm of their days. Eleanor was in the kitchen kneading bread when she heard a horse approach. Company was rare in winter, when the roads were often impassable, so she moved to the window with curiosity. The man who dismounted was a stranger, well-dressed in expensive Eastern clothing, his bearing suggesting wealth and authority. Eleanor's stomach clenched with nameless dread even before he turned and she saw his face. Henry's business partner, a man named Edmund Garrett who'd been to the house in Boston several times, who'd witnessed Henry's cruelty and said nothing, who'd laughed over brandy while Eleanor served them dinner with bruises hidden under her sleeves. Eleanor's hands went to her swollen belly protectively as panic clawed up her throat. How had he found her? Why was he here? She moved away from the window, her mind racing. Caleb and James were out checking on the cattle, wouldn't be back for at least an hour. She was alone, heavily pregnant, vulnerable in ways she hadn't been since leaving Boston. The knock on the door made her flinch. Eleanor stood frozen, torn between answering and hiding, her breath coming too fast. "Mrs. Hart?" Garrett's voice came through the door, smooth and cultured. "I know you're in there. I saw you at the window. I'd like to speak with you, if I may." Eleanor forced herself to move, to think. She couldn't hide forever, and maybe this was simply a coincidence. Maybe Garrett didn't know who she was, hadn't connected Eleanor Hart to Eleanor Price. She opened the door but kept her body blocking the entrance. "Can I help you?" Recognition flashed in Garrett's eyes immediately. "Eleanor Price, I thought it was you, but I had to be certain. May I come in? It's frightfully cold out here." "I prefer you stay there." Eleanor's voice was steadier than she felt. "State your business." Garrett's eyebrows rose. "How very Western of you. Direct. I can appreciate that." He shifted his weight, glancing past her into the warm house. "I've come on behalf of Henry Ashford. Your uncle has been looking for you, Eleanor. He's quite worried." "I doubt that." Eleanor's hand tightened on the door frame. "Henry doesn't worry about anyone but himself." Now, that's unfair. The man took you in when you had nothing, gave you a home. He beat me." The words came out flat, hard. "Repeatedly. He broke my ribs, he assaulted me, so forgive me if I don't feel grateful for his hospitality." Garrett had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Henry said you might make accusations. Said you were always prone to hysteria and exaggeration. He's prepared to overlook your indiscretions if you return to Boston. He's even willing to arrange a proper marriage for you." Eleanor laughed, the sound bitter. "I'm already married, Mr. Garrett, legally and thoroughly, to a good man who treats me with respect, and I'm carrying his child. So you can tell Henry that I won't be returning to Boston now or ever." Garrett's eyes dropped to her swollen belly, and his expression shifted to something calculating. "I see. Well, that does complicate matters. You see, Eleanor, Henry controls your father's estate. All those debts you left behind, they're still outstanding. And as your legal guardian, until you reach majority—" "I'm 23 years old," Eleanor interrupted. "Well past majority. Henry has no legal claim on me. Perhaps not legally, but morally." "Morally?" Eleanor's voice rose. "Don't speak to me about morality when you stood by and watched him hurt me, when you knew what he was and did nothing. I never saw any evidence of— You saw my bruises. I served you dinner with a black eye once, and you commented that I looked unwell. Don't pretend ignorance now." Garrett's facade of civility cracked slightly. "Whether I saw anything or not is irrelevant. Henry sent me to retrieve you, and retrieve you I shall. He's prepared to be generous about the debts if you come willingly. If you don't—" He let the threat hang. "If I don't, what?" Eleanor demanded. "He'll do what exactly? I'm 2,000 miles away, married, and under the protection of a man who actually keeps his vows." "He'll ruin you," Garrett said simply. "Spread word throughout Boston society about your abandonment, your ungrateful nature, your moral failings. He'll make sure no one believes your accusations. He's a respected man, Eleanor. You're nothing." The words hit like physical blows, bringing back every moment of Henry's psychological torture. "You're nothing. Worthless. Who would believe you?" But Eleanor wasn't that terrified girl anymore. She'd crossed a continent, built a new life, married a good man, and was about to bring new life into the world. She'd survived Henry once, and she could survive him again. "Get off my property," she said coldly, "and tell Henry that if he ever comes near me, my husband will kill him. That's not a threat, Mr. Garrett. It's a promise." "Your husband," Garrett's lip curled. "Some frontier cowboy you trapped into marriage with your condition, no doubt. How long before he realizes what a burden you are? How long before he treats you exactly like Henry did?" "Never." The voice came from behind Garrett, deep and dangerous. Caleb stood there, rifle in hand, his expression harder than Eleanor had ever seen it. "Now get on your horse and ride out of here before I do something we'll both regret." Garrett turned, his eyes widening at Caleb's size and the absolute conviction in his voice. "This is a private matter between family." "She's my family now," Caleb cut him off. "And the only family that matters to her. You have 10 seconds to mount up before I start counting bullets instead of seconds." Garrett looked between them, clearly calculating his options. Whatever he saw in Caleb's face made the decision for him. He backed toward his horse, maintaining eye contact like Caleb was a dangerous animal. "This isn't over," Garrett said as he mounted. "Henry won't give up. He has resources, connections. I don't care if he has the whole United States Army at his command," Caleb said flatly. "If he or anyone acting on his behalf comes near my wife again, they'll disappear into the Colorado wilderness and no one will ever find them. Are we clear?" Garrett didn't answer, just spurred his horse and rode away at a gallop. The moment he was out of sight, Eleanor's knees buckled. Caleb caught her, guiding her inside to the rocking chair he'd made, kneeling beside her as she struggled to breathe through the panic attack. "He found me," Eleanor gasped. "Henry found me. He knows where I am." Hey, look at me." Caleb's hands cupped her face gently. "Breathe, Eleanor. Just breathe. That man is gone, and Henry isn't here. You're safe." "But he knows. He can send more people. He can try." Caleb's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "And he'll fail." "Eleanor, I meant every word I said. No one is taking you from here. No one is taking you from me. I will protect you and our child with everything I have." Eleanor focused on Caleb's face, on the absolute certainty there, and slowly her breathing evened out. James appeared in the doorway, also carrying a rifle, his usual cheerfulness replaced by grim determination. "I sent word to the sheriff in town," James said. "Told him to keep an eye out for that stranger, make sure he actually leaves the territory. Also stopped by Martha's place. She's spreading the word to watch for any more unwelcome visitors from the east." Eleanor felt a rush of gratitude for this community that had embraced her. "Thank you." "No thanks needed," James's expression softened. "You're one of us now, Eleanor. We take care of our own." That evening, after James had gone to bed, Eleanor and Caleb lay together in their room. Eleanor couldn't sleep, her mind spinning with fears about Henry pursuing her, about the safety of their unborn child, about whether she'd ever truly escape her past. "Tell me the truth," Eleanor said quietly. "Do you think Henry will actually come here?" Caleb was silent for a long moment. "Honestly, I don't know. Men like him, men who need to control others, don't like losing. And you escaping was the ultimate loss of control. That's what I'm afraid of. But here's what I do know." Caleb shifted to face her, his hand resting on her belly where their child kicked and moved. "You're not alone anymore. You're not a frightened girl with nowhere to turn. You have me, you have James, you have this entire community. And if Henry is stupid enough to show his face here, he'll learn very quickly that frontier justice is different from Boston law." "I don't want violence," Eleanor whispered. "I don't want our child born into violence." "Neither do I." Caleb's voice was gentle. "But I won't apologize for being willing to use whatever means necessary to keep you safe. You and this baby are my world, Eleanor. I will do whatever it takes to protect my world." Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I brought this into your life, this danger, this threat." "You brought joy into my life," Caleb interrupted firmly. "Love, purpose. Everything I have now is because you took a chance on a stranger's advertisement and crossed a continent seeking safety. You didn't bring danger, Eleanor. You brought hope. Henry is the danger, not you." Over the following weeks, the community of Redemption Springs quietly mobilized. The sheriff made it known that strangers asking questions about the Hart family would be noted and tracked. Several of the ranchers, including old Tom Brennan, who ran the general store, made a point of visiting the ranch to check in. Even Reverend Mitchell stopped by, ostensibly to discuss the baby's eventual christening, but really to offer his support and assure Eleanor that the town stood with her. Winter deepened, and Eleanor's pregnancy entered its final stage. She was huge now, uncomfortable all the time, waddling rather than walking. Dr. Morrison visited weekly, pronouncing everything progressing normally, though he warned that the baby was large and the birth would likely be difficult. Eleanor tried not to think about the birth too much, tried not to remember the stories of women who died in childbirth, who bled out or tore or simply gave up from the pain. Martha and Sarah had both promised to be there, along with Dr. Morrison, but fear still crept in during quiet moments. It was mid-March when the first labor pains began. Eleanor was kneading bread, as she'd been doing that morning months ago when Garrett had appeared, when she felt the tightening across her belly that the other women had described. She finished the loaf, covered it to rise, and calmly informed Caleb that he should fetch Dr. Morrison. Caleb, who'd been calm in the face of Edmund Garrett's threats, who'd faced down rustlers and broken horses and harsh winters, went pale as milk. "Now?" he asked stupidly. "Right now?" "Not this instant," Eleanor said, amused despite the discomfort. "But soon. The pains are still far apart. You have time to get the doctor. Just don't take too long." Caleb kissed her fiercely and ran for his horse like the devil was chasing him. James appeared within minutes, having been alerted by Caleb's panicked shouting. "What do you need me to do?" James asked. "Boil water, get clean linens, and try not to hover," Eleanor instructed. "And send someone for Martha and Sarah." "On it." James paused at the door. "Eleanor? You're going to be fine. You're the toughest person I know." Eleanor appreciated the confidence even as another contraction rippled through her. "We'll see if you still think that when I'm screaming obscenities at you in a few hours." James grinned and disappeared to complete his tasks. The labor progressed slowly at first, giving Eleanor time to walk, to breathe, to prepare herself mentally for what was coming. Martha arrived first, bustling in with supplies and calm competence. Sarah came next, and finally Dr. Morrison with Caleb white-faced and shaking beside him. "I'm fine," Eleanor assured Caleb. "It's supposed to hurt. It's normal." "I hate that you're in pain," Caleb said, holding her hand too tightly. "Well, you helped put me in this condition," Eleanor snapped as another contraction hit. "So you're going to stay right here and suffer with me." Martha and Sarah exchanged knowing smiles while Dr. Morrison prepared his instruments. The easy part of labor lasted through the afternoon and into evening. Then the contractions intensified, coming harder and faster, and Eleanor understood why women feared this. The pain was relentless, overwhelming, unlike anything she'd experienced even at Henry's worst. "I can't do this," Eleanor gasped during a brief respite. "It's too much." "You can, and you are," Martha said firmly, wiping Eleanor's forehead with a cool cloth. "You've already done the hard part. Now you just have to finish it." "Easy for you to say," Eleanor groaned as another contraction built. This one made her scream, her hand crushing Caleb's as she bore down instinctively. "That's it," Dr. Morrison encouraged. "The baby's coming. Next contraction, push as hard as you can." What followed was a blur of pain and effort, and Caleb's voice in her ear telling her she was strong. She could do this, just a little more. Eleanor pushed until she thought she might split in two, screamed until her throat was raw, and somewhere in the agony understood that this was creation, painful and messy and utterly transformative. "The head's out," Dr. Morrison announced. "One more push, Eleanor, just one more." Eleanor gathered every ounce of strength she possessed and pushed. The sensation of this baby sliding free was so intense she nearly blacked out. Then a cry split the air, thin and reedy, and absolutely perfect. "It's a boy," Dr. Morrison said, his voice warm with satisfaction. "A big, healthy boy." Eleanor collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. Caleb was crying too, she realized dimly, his hand still gripping hers as Dr. Morrison cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket. "He's perfect," the doctor said, placing the small bundle in Eleanor's arms. 10 fingers, 10 toes, strong lungs. Congratulations." Eleanor looked down at her son, at his scrunched red face and shock of dark hair, at his tiny hands curled into fists, and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known possible. This was hers, theirs, a whole new person who existed because she'd been brave enough to run, to hope, to love. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I'm your mama, and I promise you'll never know the fear I knew. You'll be loved and safe and free." Caleb leaned over them both, his expression awed. "He's beautiful. You're beautiful. I can't believe we made this." "Believe it," Martha said with a laugh, helping Dr. Morrison with the afterbirth. "You two are parents now. No going back." The baby latched onto Nurse with surprising vigor, and Eleanor felt the strange pull and tug of feeding her child for the first time. It hurt slightly, but also felt deeply right, like her body knew exactly what to do, even if her mind was still catching up. Sarah and Martha bustled about, cleaning and organizing, while Dr. Morrison checked Eleanor thoroughly and pronounced her healing well. James poked his head in eventually, grinned at the sight of the baby, and declared himself the best uncle in Colorado. When everyone finally left them alone, Dr. Morrison promising to check in tomorrow, Martha insisting Eleanor rest, Caleb climbed carefully into bed beside Eleanor and their son. "We need a name," Eleanor said softly. The baby had fallen asleep at her breast, milk-drunk and peaceful. "I was thinking," Caleb hesitated. "What about Thomas? After your father?" Eleanor's throat tightened. "You do that?" "He gave me you," Caleb said simply. "Even if he didn't know it. Seems right to honor him." "Thomas Hart." Eleanor tested the name. "It's perfect." They lay together watching their son sleep, marveling at his tiny perfection, already fiercely protective of this small life they'd created. Outside, the March wind howled, but inside the house, it was warm and safe and full of promise. The weeks after Thomas's birth passed in a haze of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Eleanor discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, functioning on minimal sleep while learning to nurse and change and soothe a newborn. Caleb was endlessly helpful, walking the floor with Thomas when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint, bringing Eleanor food when she forgot to eat. The community rallied around them with meals and hand-me-down baby items and advice both solicited and not. Eleanor's favorite gift came from Martha, a quilt she'd made featuring fabric from dresses donated by every woman in town, each square representing someone who'd welcomed Eleanor into their circle. Spring arrived properly, melting the snow and turning the valley green. Eleanor began venturing outside with Thomas, walking slowly around the property while he slept in a sling against her chest. The exercise helped her body heal and her mind settle after the intensity of birth and new motherhood. It was during one of these walks, when Thomas was 6 weeks old, that Eleanor saw the rider approaching. Her first instinct was panic. Another emissary from Henry, more threats, more danger. But as the rider drew closer, Eleanor recognized the expensive Eastern clothing and her heart sank for a different reason. It was Henry himself. Eleanor's hand went to Thomas protectively as Henry dismounted in the yard. He looked older than she remembered, grayer, but his eyes held the same cold calculation that had haunted her nightmares. "Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying that familiar edge of controlled anger. "I see you've been busy." "What are you doing here?" Eleanor's voice was steadier than she felt. "I came to collect what's mine," Henry said simply. "You ran away like a thief in the night, Eleanor. Stole money from my desk. Spread lies about me to anyone who'd listen. I've come to give you a chance to make this right. I owe you nothing." Eleanor stood her ground even as her knees shook. "You beat me. You assaulted me. You terrorized me for months. I took what I was owed for services rendered and I left. That's not theft. That's survival." Henry's expression hardened. "You ungrateful little—" "That's far enough." Caleb's voice cut through the air like a blade. He emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, his face carved from stone. "You're not welcome here." Henry looked Caleb up and down dismissively. "The frontier husband. How charming. Tell me, did she mention that she's a liar? That she's prone to hysteria? That she—" "I know exactly who she is," Caleb interrupted. "She's my wife, the mother of my child, the bravest woman I've ever met, and you're the coward who beat her when she couldn't fight back." "Lies," Henry spat. "All lies. I never laid a hand on her that wasn't deserved. She was willful, disobedient. She was your victim." Caleb's voice was deadly calm. "And if you take one step closer to her or my son, you won't leave this ranch alive." Henry's hand moved toward his coat pocket, and Caleb's rifle came up instantly. "I wouldn't," Caleb warned. "I'm a very good shot, and the sheriff already knows you're here. Anything happens to you, it'll be ruled self-defense." Eleanor watched Henry's face as he calculated his options. She could see him weighing violence against self-preservation, rage against survival. For a long moment, she thought he might actually try to fight. Then James appeared with his own rifle, followed by Tom Brennan and two other ranchers, all armed and all looking grimly determined. "Seems like the whole town knows you're here, Mr. Ashford," James said conversationally. "Word spreads fast in small communities, and we take care of our own." Henry's face twisted with fury and impotence. "This isn't over," he snarled at Eleanor. "You think you're safe here? You think these people will protect you forever? I have resources, connections, and we have justice," Caleb said flatly. "Real justice. Not the kind money can buy in Boston. You lay one more finger on Eleanor, you threaten her again in any way, and every man here will swear they saw you attack first. They'll bury you in an unmarked grave, and no one will ever know what happened to you." The threat hung in the air, stark and absolute. Henry looked around at the assembled men, at their hard faces and ready weapons, and something in his expression shifted. He was used to power coming from money and position. Out here, power came from community and conviction, and he had neither. "Keep her then," Henry said viciously. "Keep the worthless, damaged goods. See how long it takes before you realize what a burden she is." "She's not a burden," Eleanor said, finding her voice. "She's a survivor, and she's done being afraid of you, Henry. You have no power here, no control, no say in my life anymore. I'm free of you, and I'm never looking back." Henry opened his mouth to retort, but seemed to think better of it. He mounted his horse with jerky movements, his face purple with suppressed rage. "You'll regret this," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "The only thing I regret," Eleanor said clearly, "is not leaving sooner." They watched Henry ride away, his horse kicking up dust as he disappeared down the road. The men didn't lower their weapons until he was completely out of sight. "He won't be back," Tom Brennan said with certainty. "Bullies like that only fight when the odds are in their favor. He knows he's beaten." Eleanor felt something inside her release, some tension she'd been carrying since the moment she'd fled Boston. "He's really gone." "He's really gone," Caleb confirmed, pulling her into his arms carefully, mindful of Thomas between them. "And even if he tried to come back, he'd have to go through all of us." That evening, after the other men had left and Thomas was asleep in his cradle, Eleanor and Caleb sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The valley was painted in shades of gold and purple, and the air smelled of pine and wildflowers and possibility. "I keep waiting to feel different," Eleanor said softly. "Now that Henry's gone, now that the threat is over, I thought I'd feel relieved or vindicated or something, but I just feel tired." "You've been running on fear and adrenaline for months," Caleb said, his arm around her shoulders. "Now that the danger's past, your body's realizing how exhausted it is. That's normal. Is it also normal to still be afraid?" Eleanor's voice was small. "I know he's gone. I know he can't hurt me anymore, but I'm still scared." "Fear doesn't disappear overnight just because the threat does," Caleb said gently. "It takes time for your body to understand that you're safe. But that's what we have, Eleanor. Time. All the time in the world to heal, to grow, to be happy." Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder. "Tell me about the future. Tell me what our life is going to look like." Caleb was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "We'll raise Thomas here, teach him to ride and rope and work the land. Maybe give him a little brother or sister when you're ready. We'll expand the ranch, build a bigger house, watch the seasons turn and the cattle multiply. Grow old together, watching sunsets just like this one." "That sounds perfect," Eleanor whispered. "It won't always be easy," Caleb continued honestly. "There'll be hard years, droughts and harsh winters and all the challenges that come with ranch life. But we'll face them together, as partners, as a family." Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here. The violence she'd endured, the courage it had taken to run, the leap of faith in answering Caleb's advertisement. She thought about everything she'd learned about herself in the process, her strength, her resilience, her capacity for trust even after betrayal. "I want more children," she said suddenly. "Not right away, but eventually. I want Thomas to have siblings. Want our house to be full of laughter and noise and love." "We can do that." Caleb's hand found hers. "We can build exactly the life we want, together." The seasons cycled through their familiar patterns. Summer brought heat and hard work as they brought in the hay and prepared for winter. Fall painted the mountains in impossible colors, and brought the cattle down from high pasture. Winter arrived with early snow, and Eleanor spent long evenings by the fire with Thomas on her lap, teaching him his letters while Caleb worked on ranch accounts. Spring came again. Thomas celebrated his first birthday surrounded by the community that had embraced his mother, and Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time, there was no fear, only joy. This time, she knew exactly what she was choosing and why. This time, she could imagine the future with clarity and hope. The second pregnancy was easier than the first, maybe because Eleanor knew what to expect, or maybe because she wasn't carrying the weight of trauma alongside the baby. When her daughter was born on a crisp October morning, Eleanor named her Anna after the woman Caleb had lost, and watched her husband cry tears of healing and gratitude. Years passed, the ranch prospered. Thomas grew tall and strong, with Caleb's steady nature and Eleanor's fierce determination. Anna proved to be a force of nature from the moment she could walk, climbing everything and afraid of nothing. A third child arrived, another boy they named James after his uncle, who spoiled all the children outrageously. Eleanor's bruises faded to nothing, not even scars to mark where they'd been. She grew confident in her role as wife and mother, as part of the community, as herself. The nightmares came less frequently, then hardly at all. The flinching stopped. The fear became a memory rather than a constant companion. On their 10th anniversary, Caleb gave Eleanor a photograph he'd commissioned. Their family arranged on the porch of the house they'd expanded twice to accommodate their growing children. Looking at it, Eleanor barely recognized the frightened woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach a decade ago. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked. "Answering my advertisement? Coming here?" Eleanor looked at her husband, at the silver threading through his hair, at the lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun and laughing with his children. She looked at Thomas teaching Anna to rope a fence post while baby James watched with wide eyes. She looked at the ranch stretching out around them, at the mountains standing eternal in the distance, at the life they'd built from nothing but hope and hard work. "Never," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "This is everything I never knew I needed." She'd come to Colorado running from violence, seeking safety, expecting nothing more than survival. What she'd found instead was home, not just a place, but a belonging to this land, to this community, to this family they'd created together. Eleanor Hart stood on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, her husband's hand in hers, her children's laughter filling the air, and felt peace settle over her like a blessing. The bruises were gone. The fear was fading, and the life she'd built from the ashes of her old one was more beautiful than anything she'd dared imagine. She'd crossed a continent to escape her past. What she'd discovered was her future, and it was exactly where she belonged.